The Art of Being Ruled. Wyndham Lewis. Original publication 1926. 1989 edition. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. Part 4. Vulgarization and Political Decay. Chapter 6. George Sorel. George Sorel is an even stronger vulgarizer in some ways than Nietzsche, of whom he was a follower of sorts. He vulgarized aristocracy, as seen through the eyes of Nietzsche, for the laborer and mechanic. George Sorel is the key to all contemporary political thought. Sorel is, or was, a highly unstable and equivocal figure. He seems composed of a crowd of warring personalities, sometimes one being in the ascendant, sometimes another, and which in any case he has not been able, or has not cared, to control. He is the arch-exponent of extreme action and revolutionary violence outrants, but he expounds this sanguinary doctrine in manuals that often, by the changing of a few words, would equally serve the forces of traditional authority, and provide them with a twin evangel of demented and intolerant class war. If he must be given conventionally a class, he has that chilliness that you associate more with the official class than with that of the artisan or servant. In this he is the opposite of Peggy. Yet in his criticism of the class he attacks, he displays sometimes so much fierceness and acuity that it is difficult to doubt his sincerity on such occasions. But sincerity hardly enters into the question. George Sorel is a mercenary who is devoted to his profession, that of arms, and is willing to fight without pay, since in easy circumstances the cause matters very little to him, the battle is everything. And yet in the midst of this detachment you have to allow for some deep, and indeed rather mysterious, sectarian passion. And intellectually he is a sensitive plate for the confused ideology of his time. He is a Semitor who sees red both ways. The bull nature injects the human eyes with blood. He is, in brief, a symptomatic figure that it would be difficult to match. As to his standing in the world of letters and politics, and in that as in everything else he is a fabulous hybrid, attacking himself, biting his own tail, kicking his own heroical chest, contunding his own unsynthetic flesh, and showing his wounds with pride, self-inflicted, self in everything. He has an enviable position. Sorel, says his English translator, Hume, is one of the most remarkable writers of his time, certainly the most remarkable socialist since Marx. Introduction, Eng. Translation of Réflexions sur la violence. T. E. Hume. So this strangest of socialists is described. No one would dispute such a claim. Quintessence, extremisme, individualite, differentiation elite, c'est du sorlisme intégral. Par l'héroïsme, et par l'hétérogénéité, M. Sorel est le grand excitateur du monde moderne. Itinéraire d'intellectuels. R. Johannat. That is the man, as he appears to many of his contemporaries, with whose ideas we are dealing. M. Johannat, the writer I have just quoted, believes that his ideas are ultimately of more use to reaction than to social revolution. I do not share that view, but I think his practical work of incitement to revolt must be considered apart from his more speculative work, though it enters into that, of course, and often causes some confusion. M. Johannat prefers to leave Sorel as an enigma, an insoluble problem. Always enigmatic and reserved, he writes of him, a master of obsessional ideas, and generator of the maximum of tension, always fleeting and unstable, so he appears to us, even in the depths of his confidences. Why? Are we dreaming after all? The Sorel individualist, then the Sorel socialist and traditionalist, are they after all only attitudes of a curious student? Insoluble problem. The faith in socialism, says Le Bon, Psychologie politique, quoted approvingly by Sorel, gives back to the simple-hearted the hopes that the gods no longer provide, and the illusions that science has taken away from them. Sorel has certainly the attitude of a lonely traveler who has gone into the comfortable atmosphere of a rustic inn, for whose appointments he has a superior townsman's contempt, just to be out of the néant for the brief period of his life. Once there, he seems to have been moved to entertain and excite his simple hearers with accounts of blood-curdling and quixotic adventures. He thought he would supply them with the epic and heroic material they had lost at the same time as they lost the comforts of religion and their simple faith. That is the Sorel of the Réflexions sur la violence. Fourier, with his Papillon, started revolutionary thought on a course of psychological exploitation. The child's love of dirt, les immondices, was to be utilized to get the scavenging work of the phalanstery done with the efficiency of gusto. Sorel would apply the Papillon system to humanity's noble instinct for blood and carnage, very different, he is at pains to point out, to the rather despicable notion of Jaurès, by which their envy and hatred should be exploited, la haine créatrice, as he called it. Genuinely violent, about that there is little doubt, he applies the Nietzschean warlike idea to the crowd, with a great deal of jugglery which it is not difficult to penetrate. He steals the philosophy of war, in short, and passes it quickly to the slave against whom the romantic Nietzsche had designed that it should be used. But he does not at the same time fail to abuse the slave with a few aristocratic airs that he has stolen, along with the war, especially if the slave does not snatch at his beautiful present eagerly enough. It is not surprising that at times it is difficult to tell where the stolen packet has got to, and in whose hands, at the moment, it is supposed to be. His taunts with regard to the mediocrity of his curious protégés never slacken. This crowdmaster and this crowd are the most strangely assorted pair, in fact. He takes his revolutionary blessings to them whip in hand, with a girding pedagogic intolerance. Coriolanus could not be more contemptuous asking for their voices. Only, he has no wounds to show, although very martial and possessing a fine patriotic vein, he approaches his proletariat with the airs of a missionary among natives, with an armed colonizing government behind him. His colleagues also feel the weight of his lash. For example, the transformations that Marxism has undergone illustrate very well the theory of mediocrity. The social democratic writers, who have pretended to interpret, apply, and extend the doctrine of their so-called master, were men of a surprising vulgarity. The great mistake of Marx was to undervalue the enormous power of mediocrity as displayed throughout history. He did not understand that the feeling for socialism, as he conceived it, was extremely artificial. The production of the hero, and of the heroic, was his constant preoccupation. It is that, as M. Johannit says, that took him to Catholicism. He interrogated in turn Proudhon, Marx, and Isaiah, Pelloutier, in search of this elusive phantom of a past world. Only in social revolution did he see possibilities of the old grandeur and vigor. His proletariat is really the people of the Germania of Tacitus. Greek Christianity, he says, is very inferior to Latin Christianity, every one is agreed, because it had not at its service men spiritually trained, rushing to the conquest of the profane world. The exceptional value of Catholicism comes from its monastic institutions continually providing the conditions for the formation of such heroes. What we know of the Hebrew prophets enables us to say that the Judaism of the Old Testament owes its glory to religious experience. The modern Jews only see in their religion rites analogous to those of the ancient magical superstitious cults. La ruine du monde antique. To the Bible Sorel constantly points, but of course to the Old Testament, not the New. He tells the world of the universities and the bourgeoisie that if they would turn to that admirably savage and moral book they would once more become sublime by dipping into that fiery source. Like Cromwell, His Highness' speech to the Parliament in the Painted Chamber, at their dissolution upon Monday, January 22, 1654-5, he might have pointed to such passages of an invigorating description as are to be found in the Bible. 1. Who is this that cometh from Edom, with dyed garments from Basra? This that is glorious in his apparel, travelling in the greatness of his strength? I that speak in righteousness, mighty to save. 2. Wherefore art thou red in thy apparel, and thy garments like him that treadeth in the wine fat? 3. I have trodden the winepress alone, and of the people there was none with me, for I will tread them in mine anger, and trample them in my fury, and their blood shall be sprinkled upon my garments, and I will stain all my raiment. 4. For the day of vengeance is in mine heart, and the year of my redeemed is come. 6. And I will tread down the people in mine anger, and make them drunk in my fury. Isaiah 63. It will be seen that the gaudy red figure is not without its sublimity, that action is his passion if not his element, perhaps his exoticism, as it is a woman's, and that such a man would not be likely to have great sympathy with Kautsky and his views. The tearing of men's hearts out of their bodies, and the stewing of their eyeballs in the gravy of their bowels, or the stamping on the pulp of their entrails and making a burgundy of their blood, or making a hole in their abdomen and winding their entrails round a tree, as Brian Boru did to celebrate his triumph, is not the type of action that appeals to me most, for reasons already set forth. I found myself in the bloodbath of the Great War, and in that situation reflected on the vanity of violence. So that side of Sorel seems to me too literary. But all the emotional and heroic section of Sorel is deeply romantic, and by that I understand untrue. A truer part of him, as see it, you get in his analysis of progress and ideas about class.